What's going on, everybody? It's your favorite hillbilly coming to you right out of Hog Holler. You guessed it. Going to talk to you guys there for a little bit, and got a story to tell you. I kind of have to watch. I'm bad about telling the same story twice. Maybe I can't keep up with the stories I've told and the stories I ain't told. I never go back and watch the videos I've put on here unless somebody just spots something or wants me to look at something in there. But got a story Granny used to tell me growing up when I was a kid, and I'll pass that on to you. It's pretty scary growing up. It's scary today. Of course, all these stories I tell are passed down and handed down. Folklore, a lot of them. A lot of it, I wouldn't repeat a story that I hadn't heard told a few times, or that I didn't feel like wasn't true or didn't have some degree of truth to it. So most of these stories that y'all hear come from my family or people my family know and have been told and passed down. So I'm just passing them on to you. But before we get into that, I was wanting to talk to you all a little bit. Sitting here wondering what's going on. I'm digging up these old rocks, trying to find anything I can. I wanted to talk about, been a lot of talk about cryptids in the Smoky Mountains, and I've had a lot of comments and questions about that here as of late, and people asking me about it. And I want to say that when my family's generation was growing up back in the woods and in the mountains, you didn't really have the term dog man. I don't even know if you had the term werewolf. Maybe Bigfoot, but not like, not tossed around like it is today. But they just simply called them monsters. That's all it was referred to. Was they didn't know what it was. It's just a monster out there in the woods. And we would hear this told from time to time growing up, to stay away from certain areas, certain parts of the Smokies that have caves, certain parts of the land around here that's not actually in the national park, there's a lot of caves. And so we would get told about different so-called monsters and things and stuff that people would come across in the woods. I remember my granny telling me that her brother had come across something one night coming home. He come home from hunting, and the sun had set on him. It had gotten dark, and he was coming home on then what was, I guess, an old dirt road, walking home with his rifle. And there was something standing in the road or trail as he tried to make it back home. And it had the moon, she said, behind its back. So he wasn't sure if this was a person or what it was. He didn't want to just throw up and shoot something that he wasn't for sure what he was shooting at. But he said it's awful big to be a person. And then he could tell it had hair on it. And then he said it kind of growled. So he never did really see any features, but he knew that this wasn't a person. And he said at that point, up the bank it went. He told that story a lot to her as they was growing up. And then I think other people around that part had seen stuff like that too. Real pretty tree farm over there growing. They had seen stuff like that too in that part of the woods. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff in these old mountains and stuff. There's a lot of unexplained, mysterious stuff in the Smokies. I know that my uncles used to tell me of a cave that you could go to, and you could go so far back in there and you would hear voices. It's like you could hear people whispering, talking. Really couldn't make out what they were saying or even what language they might be using. There was other places that you would hear a lady cry in the woods, sobbing, and they could always tell when you would be in these places. You get this feeling, this cold chill runs up your back. And that's something else I want to talk to too about, is the antennas on people. But they talked about all these different places and things around here that are mysterious. Now, if you come here and you know you're a visitor, a tourist, and you're probably not going to experience many of these places. I mean, these places are back in where you can't get to, basically. These places are off the grid, so to speak, and a lot of them's on private property. Probably Cades Cove, as the sun goes down, probably be an experience. I know my wife, I think I've told y'all this before, my wife being not much of a believer in any of this, when we went to the Primitive Baptist Church way back in the woods there on the gravel road about sundown, she was crying and begging me to get back in the truck. She had this terrible anxiety feeling going on, and of course that's when I took the picture, and there's something standing there in front of me. It's transparent. A lot of people can see it and a lot of people can't. It's in the community part of my channel, but yeah, she her feelers was on that day. When we talk about people, I've seen a lot of people who live around here and put comments on that, you know, I've never seen a feral man. I've never seen a Bigfoot. I've lived there all my life. I haven't seen these things. You know, you're crazy. Or I've been in that holler before and I never heard anything. Doesn't mean it's there. It's not there. You just not tuned into it. If you're not looking for it, then you're probably overlooking it or not going to find it. Just like this field here, I've not seen any arrowheads, but that doesn't mean they're not here. Where somebody else could come along and find them laying everywhere. So it doesn't mean they're not there. You just have to know how and what to look for. And it doesn't come to, you can't just say, well, I'm going to set out today and I'm going to turn my antenna on and I'm going to see what. It doesn't work like that either. It's the more open to this stuff, this mysterious stuff, whether it be cryptids, paranormal, you know, spirits, whatever, the more open you allow yourself to be to it, the more you experience it, the more you can sense it, the more you can find it around you, if that makes sense. That's odd. Look at that X on that rock. That is very odd out here. Maybe X marks a spot. I might ought to turn that over and see if there's any gold under it. Probably nothing but a snake. But that doesn't mean it's not there just because you can't find it. You know, maybe Barton Nunley could come out here and find arrowheads. I'm sure he could, from there to there, and prove me wrong that there's all kinds of arrowheads here. I wish I could find them like he can. But just because you don't see it doesn't mean that it's not around you or it's not happening. And even some people get lucky and look down and find an arrowhead without trying. Same thing with this unexplained stuff. Without trying, sometimes you may get an experience. But I've had a lot of people talk to me about that and say, oh, well, I've been there and I lived here and everything, and I've never seen that, and I've never seen a wild man, and I've not. Well, how much have you got out and looked for it? Exactly how much have you investigated this stuff? If you don't turn your antennas on and start looking and listening to what's around you, then you're going to walk right past it. I've probably stepped over 25 arrowheads right now. But you know, I wanted to address those people, a lot of naysayers and a lot of people in the comments who, just because they haven't seen it doesn't mean, you know, it don't exist. I haven't seen it, and these are the same people who don't leave the keyboard. But anyhow, let me get on to the story I was going to tell you. I have to pick and choose. I've got so many, some of the ones I want to tell, but my grandmother, she used to tell this story. This lady was her friend. She knew everybody back in the county. She had 10 kids, I believe it was. And that's why I've got such a large family and know so many stories and everything. But back then around here, everybody knew everybody. And this lady and her family, The lady she knew was actually a grandmother too. She lived with a man, a husband and wife, and their kids. But she got the story from the grandmother. They lived way back at the end of this holler. And they had lived there for, years and years, and had never really had any trouble with anything, you know, never really had experienced anything or anything like that. And it all started one night. You know, back then people would sit on the porch and they would sit out breaking beans one night, and they could hear something like 4 or 5 hollers over, just like a wail. Not like the banshee scream or anything like that. This was just like a wailing. Not like a cat would do or a panther or anything like that. This was something that just makes a hair stand up on the back of your neck. Well, she claimed when she heard it, she uttered, "Oh no, not again." And the kids and everybody wanted to know, what do you mean not again? What is that? What's that noise? And she more or less just like, I don't know. I'm just, just talking. So a few nights go by, and they're outside again. I think catching lightning bugs or something. I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're outside again. Most people are in the summer or fall. And this time they hear it again, this wail. But this time it's a lot closer. It's only just a few hollers over, and it's a lot louder. Well, this time everybody goes in the house, because this is something, when you hear something that's unnatural, that don't belong where you're at, it seems just ungodly, it'll scare you. It'll scare you. You don't have to see it. Sometimes just hearing it's worse, because then your imagination's open to what it might be. So they go in, lock their doors. The next day, the husband goes out, and he goes around, asks a few of the closest neighbors, which are still probably half mile away or maybe more, if they had been hearing anything of the night. And everybody told him no, we haven't heard anything. It's like, about 7 o'clock we're hearing this wailing. No, we was out and we didn't hear anything. So a night or two goes by, and again they're out now, and they're just sort of listening for it. They're wanting to see if they can hear it again. They've listened for a couple of nights and nothing. So this time they're sitting on their porch, and sure enough, here comes the wailing noise again. And this time it's coming just from the tree line, just out of sight of this tree line. And of course it freaks everybody out. Everybody goes back in. Men have rifles and guns, and everybody's kindly waiting to see what might step out of the tree line into the light where they can see it, and nothing. Nothing happens, and they see nothing for a night or two. And then it started. And I think it started with one of the girls, the children. As they had put her to bed, a few hours later, she come running into the living room screaming and crying that there was an old lady looking in her window. And of course everybody goes outside and looks around, can't find nothing. Next day there's no footprints or anything. But this girl is frozen with fear. It done something to her. And so you skip forward a few nights later, and now one of the sons hears something, and it's scratching at his window. And as he looks out, it's an old lady looking in his window, and he describes it as having like a glowing white face. Now this is particularly horrifying to this young child, because his bedroom's on the 2nd floor, where there's no way that nothing can be at the window. So again, they go outside. They don't know what's happening, what's going on. And I think this time the grandmother, her name was Neva. I think Neva kindly suspects that there's maybe witchcraft going on somewhere nearby in the woods. Not really sure why this is happening, or if it's happening. Maybe the kids are just playing, or got a vivid imagination. So time goes on. A few nights later, And now the dad, he's sitting out on the front porch, kind of keeping guard and watching when he sees something come out of the woods. And there's two of them. And they're floating just about a foot off the ground. And they're almost glowing, solid white. You can't really see through them. Now I'm telling this the best that it was told to me. You can't really see through them. They're not transparent. They're there, looks like. And they come out of the wood line and they're floating toward him. And he can hear that noise that they was hearing back in the hollers, back in the tree line, that wailing. He can hear it, but he can't move. It's almost like he is either got something wrong with him, or he's frozen with fear, or there's a little spell put on him or something, but he can't move. He's literally scared to death as these things come up and approach him, and he's sitting there on the porch. He's got his gun there beside him, but he cannot move a muscle. He can't even get a breath. And about that time, the wife opens up the door to check on him, and she can tell he's sitting there ghost white, sweating, but there's nothing around. She calls his name, and he looks at her. When he looks back, there's nothing. So he tells her, we're going to have to move. We're going to have to do something. I saw it. He was trembling with fear. Now, this was a big man. This man, I've seen pictures. He was a big old burly man. He wasn't very afraid of anything. He went bear hunting, and he'd be gone for nights at a time. This man was terrified, just like a child. Well, this started happening quite often. It got to the mother. It happened to her, and it happened to her the daytime. She was in the kitchen and she was washing dishes, and here come one of these things. And the best that it was described, how they was described, it was different. It wasn't the same one. It was different every time. There was different ones. Here come one of these things right out of the wood line again, floating above the ground. And she could hear it saying her name. And she was standing there doing dishes, fixing sandwiches, I'm cooking supper. I'm not sure what she was doing in the kitchen, but she was in the kitchen and looking out the window. And she was froze with fear. Now, these things either had the ability to make you freeze in place, or they was just so horrifying that you couldn't move. But either way, there she is, frozen with fear. And the kids come into the kitchen, and the kids see it. Everybody are starting to see these things, including Neva. She sees them. She sees them out in the yard of the nighttime. It's getting to where they look out the windows of the nighttime, and these things are all along the tree line. And they decide that someone in the community has put a spell on them or their property, but they don't know why. Why this would be done, or who done it. What's the reason that this is happening? So in their minds, here's the sad part, they start losing their minds. They start thinking that this is witches that are coming to them, or spirits for some reason are coming to them. They don't know why or exactly what it is. And it's coming to them, coming to their property. And it's terrifying them. And what's the purpose of this? What's behind this? So they go to the old granny witch that lived, I don't know, a few hollers down. And she told them that it was something that they owned. The best that she could, the feeling she got. And I don't know how granny witching works exactly, but the best feeling that she got, something they owned was causing this. But as time went on, these poor people were tormented by these things, and nobody else in the community was bothered. And these people would go into town to buy groceries, and it got to where nobody in the community would talk to them or wanted anything to do with them. And then it got to where they would go to church, and the people didn't want them coming to their church. Now, I don't know if people was afraid that something would attach itself to them, or if they just thought these people were insane or what. But these poor people were shunned in this community. The community it's next door to where I live. And people didn't want nothing to do with them because it got to where these people would pray out in public on the streets and in the courthouse square and stuff, and pray for the curse to be lifted, have public announcements to whoever is the witchcraft behind them. They demand they take this curse off. I mean, it was just a spectacle of everything. They didn't know what was causing it, and it was just a real spectacle of everything. And the ending of the story is pretty sad. What happened is this never did stop with these people. This went on for like 6 months, and eventually the man and wife were instituted. One or two of the kids, I can't say this word on here, they took care of themselves, and they was no longer living. And then I think another one or two was institutionalized. And the Neva, the granny, she was the only one who never really caused a scene or spectacle with this. And what she would go on to tell my granny was that she had seen this happen to another family when she was a kid, a real young kid. And with this family, when all this happened, the wailing coming from the holler and all that, when all that started, what happened was at the end, these people offed themselves. The whole family that she knew when she was a child sort of offed themselves. And when she said, "Oh no, not again," she could remember that story around the community. So that's where she went with that, and that's why she never acted up or showed a scene. And she tried to keep the family from doing it too, and they would not do it. They felt like they had to go public with this, that somebody had caused this harm to them. So that being said, the people who moved in the house after never experienced anything. No trouble at all. A few people had lived there since then, and I think all that's left of the house today is a foundation and a chimney. And if you go way back in this holler, of course now it's on private property, hadn't been back there in years, that's all that you can find is a old chimney and a house standing. But yeah, it was a pretty terrifying story to hear. And I barely remember the lady Neva as I was a kid. She'd come by. Of course, she wouldn't talk about none of this in front of me. But I can remember my grandmother and some of my aunts talking about this story. And they asked Neva what she thought caused it. What do you think, or what do you think they owned? Or who do you think in the community, if there was a witch, what caused this to happen to your family? And the only thing that she could think of was the father, a month or two before this started happening, had went somewhere out in Middle Tennessee, around Clarksville or somewhere, and he had bought an old wagon that somebody had owned a farm out there. And he had bought an old wagon. I mean, it was antique back in those days, so it had to be very old. And after he had bought the wagon, a month or so later, that's when the wailings started. He started hearing these things. But this affected the family profoundly until they, like I say, they all offed themselves. A few of the kids and the parents were institutionalized. They've since passed. I think one of the boys had been let out. Of course, I think he's passed now, but I can remember seeing him downtown, and he still wasn't right. This affected them and their lives right up until the time that the ones who was left remaining passed. So I thought I'd pass that story on to y'all. It's a story I used to hear a lot when I was growing up. I can imagine how terrifying it would be to see some old lady with glowing skin floating off the ground coming up to your window, sinister grin on her face and pecking and scratching and saying your name. I only imagine. But only around here stuff like that happen. And like I say, if you ain't got your feelers on and stuff, it's a lot of this stuff you walk right on by and you never even see. But another thing, if y'all remember, I got a video about I don't know, golly, it's about when I first started this channel, Shadow Ridge video, right up there. I don't know if you can see that or not, but not where that house is, not where that cabin, not there, right there is Shadow Ridge. It's straight up and down, and a lot of times, I don't know if you can tell from this camera or not, but it's straight up and down, and you'll see lights at the night time. I got another video where there's a light. Somebody commented and said, well, it's somebody camping. You know, you're not going to camp on the side of a cliff. But that's the famed Shadow Ridge right there, where people would walk up and see their shadow. When they walked up and looked down, sometimes you might see two shadows, and you was by yourself. That meant somebody else standing there with you. But there's a video on that. If y'all want to go back and watch it, it's old. But anyway, guys, I'm gonna hop off here and head back toward the house. I thought I'd come out here in this field and shoot a video and talk to y'all about that and tell y'all some of the comments on the cryptids and stuff. But yeah, they just didn't call them cryptids back then. It was just beasts or monsters or things or demons. You know, they didn't have the name exactly dog man. Even I've got a video about my uncle who come across a dog man, but he describes it as a werewolf back then, because the term really wasn't around. So anyway, guys, I hope you have a happy rest of your day, and I'll get back on here before too long. I'll be seeing y'all later. Bye.